Hello and welcome to ThePrint. My name is Deepika Amirapu. Our guest today is Mr. PTR, Palanivel Thiaga Rajan, former Finance Minister, current Minister for IT and Digital Services. Thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to be talking to you.
Thank you for inviting me.
We're already in the election season and today's been a day of announcements. We've had the 30% women's reservation in the Parliament being rolled out from 2029. We've also had the DMK release its manifesto. What are your comments on the women's bill now becoming an act in the Parliament with 30% of women eligible to become elected MPs?
Momentous occasions like a long pending fulfillment of the reservation. These are major milestones in our democracy, and the party has a very clear view. Many people have struggled to make this happen across the spectrum of politics. So it's a big day, but I think my Chief Minister, leader of the party, has put out a statement, so I'll stick with that. As far as the manifesto is concerned, to be honest, I've been busy. I haven't read the DMK manifesto as yet. But I suspect that people will judge manifestos not just on what it promises, but also on the credibility of the people who make the promise and the track record of the promises.
And the promises being kept up.
Yeah, the track record of how many promises have been fulfilled in the past. I don't want to unnecessarily get political, but I just want to point out that when we came to office, I published a report as Finance Minister within 6 months, which we had promised before we got elected, to say how many of the announcements made by former Chief Ministers of the DMK in the 10 years that they were in the government between 2011 and 21, how many of those have actually been implemented. And it was quite a pretty dismal record. So the point I'm making is, it's one thing to make manifesto commitments that are they're not legally binding in some sense, because they're spoken in the...
whether you call them the promises or guarantees.
Yeah, but they're you can't take somebody to court to say that you didn't do it. Whereas things that are said in the Assembly ought to be more sacrosanct. In theory, you could take somebody to the Privileges Committee for making commitments. And even those were not fulfilled to the largest extent. So anyway, I think, manifestos, the content is important, the credibility and track record of the people making them, making these promises, and the content is important, and the voters will decide.
The number of promises seem to be going up with every passing election. You had 100 plus, ADMK is talking about 200 plus promises. Do budgets really allow for this kind of welfare measures to be implemented? Tamil Nadu's debt today is at about 10.5 lakh crore.
I think some of it is budget related, some of it is execution related. In my experience at least, the bigger limitation in government is that the gap between intent and delivery across all governments of all parties in all states and all countries is widening. That is true. That is in fact one of the reasons why the model of democracy and a democratic republic seems to be under strain.
Right.
And you're seeing increasingly kind of extremist and disruptive forces, get prominence in the political debate in most democratic countries. So money is one thing, execution capability is something else altogether. And then, of course, the natural inertia of politics and the bureaucracy.
Right.
Because politicians have an urgency. They're elected for limited terms.
Yes. We live like between a 5-year term.
The bureaucracy is inherently,
eternal.
Yeah, and so it has no real incentive to be very active or aggressive.
But in a state like Tamil Nadu, they literally run the state, people say. It's been like that for decades now?
I'm not a buyer of that. In the sense, I think democracy calls for elected officials to be making and taking decisions. If you really have a state where the bureaucracy is running the state, then that is not democracy at all, because the bureaucrats were not elected by the people. So if in fact in a state the bureaucrats are running it, then you've got a problem, because either the elected people have outsourced their work or somebody has usurped their work. In either event, that is a failure of democracy.
But isn't administrative efficiency as important as political will? And doesn't it lend credence to the ability of a state to really implement and roll out everything that's been promised?
That's a very good question. Early in my days as minister, I ran into a senior executive of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the BRICS Bank. And he had served many years in the Gujarat government under our current Prime Minister, then Chief Minister. And so he told me that his lesson from public life was that to get anything done, to actually drive change, to get better outcomes, you need political will and administrative skill.
Right.
So I agree with that. But political will can come only from the politicians, because they are the ones who have to face the elections. There's no such thing as political will in the bureaucracy, because they never have to face an election. So it doesn't matter, they have no skin in the game. Administrative skill can come from anywhere. There's no prerequisite that politicians cannot be good administrators. So if you say that administrative skill comes exclusively from the bureaucracy, it's like being insulting to politicians actually.
The ADMK's manifesto still looks like a little bit of a revision from what you've done. 1,000 rupees you were giving to all the women household, heads of household. They're talking about 2,000 rupees. I think they're following the Bihar model of giving 10,000 rupees a month. Where does this leave the grammar of welfareism in southern India, given the fact that Tamil Nadu is going to be hutless by 2030, Kerala has done away with abject poverty. Almost all of Karnataka's tier 2 cities per capita income surpasses the national average. Telangana is of course India's highest per capita income, and Andhra Pradesh has rolled out a phenomenal P4 scheme that's going to be doing away with poverty again by 2029 if not earlier. So how do you want to redefine welfare politics here, not just in the context of elections that are being fought, but in terms of what really defines welfare today?
Yeah, I think you can look at this two ways, at least. I mean, of course, 100 perspectives on anything, but two ways. The first is, what is the definition of welfare, right? If welfare is that the quality of people's lives should be better, then it is very clear that money alone cannot guarantee welfare, right? So I think welfare can come in many ways, but if quality of life is the basis for the well-being of people, good health, good living conditions, good life expectancy, good productivity because they've been given education and nutrition and access to a good labor market, then welfare is quite a complicated thing. Money is probably, giving away money is probably the easiest component of that.
Right.
But there's actually a lot more that you need to do. In fact, if you look at most places, urban infrastructure is failing. Urban quality of life is deteriorating. Waste management, sewer management, drinking water supplies, pollution levels, transportation networks, road quality, all these are much harder to do than giving money, and they're not doing nearly as well. So I think welfare needs to be defined much more broadly. And I said this, 10 years ago. 2016 was the 100th year anniversary of the Justice Party, which my family had been involved in starting. So I wrote an essay which then the party newspaper carried it as an article, and it was then the main kind of talking point of a ceremony that the party had. We were in opposition at the time. And so I said, looking back with gratitude and looking ahead with a renewed sense of purpose. So what does it mean to have social justice and inclusion and opportunity for all in this age? And how is that different from 1916? And one of the points I made was that we should strive for the notion of a life of dignity, a life with dignity.
Right.
Where, you don't have to be in squalid circumstances and you have to worry about disease and infection and mosquitoes and things like that. So I think welfare we must think of more broadly than just having a house and food and money and clothes.
Yeah,
right?
so the roti kapra makan model
I mean,
has
I
to
think,
be completely redefined.
Because we're past that. I'm not
Yes,
saying it's not
yeah,
important, but
yeah.
at least the southern states,
Yes.
we've crossed that, right? Per capita income in Tamil Nadu is something over 3 lakh rupees or something. So we need to start thinking differently. We should have been for a while. We are to some extent. We need to do more. The difference of whether giving money is always just election gimmick or always just a kind of easy appeasement, that's a different question altogether. Because, as I say from first principles,
Yes.
the job of a state, economically speaking, can be broadly reduced to 3 categories. One, to raise enough revenues fairly and justly, and without having to borrow debt, invest in improving the quality of lives of people, public services, public goods, all the things we talked about, roads and water and atmosphere. And second, to create a relatively good environment for entrepreneurship and innovation to flourish, so that economic activity, economic growth, which is not largely the domain of the government, which is of private enterprise, is encouraged, and as they grow, then the revenues paid in taxes and fees and things to the government grows, and you get the government is able to do more things, and it becomes a virtuous cycle. And the third has to be that you go out of your way to make some attempt to keep the haves and the have-nots from separating too much. That you basically want to keep a relatively equitable society, at least in outcome, at least in opportunity, if not outcome. That is to say, at least everybody should have access to good health, at least everybody should have access to good education, at least everybody should have a basic living. At least even if you're unemployed or you're sick, you should not have to worry about food or your house. That, that level of protecting the weak or protecting the temporarily disadvantaged or permanently disadvantaged, has to be the job of the state. So in that sense, you have to do something because that's part of your core responsibility in my understanding. And I would say at least, very proudly I would say in the last 5 years of our government, we are doing much more data-based governance and scheme administration than I have ever heard or heard of or seen in India in my time in politics or in my reading. So we created much better databases than we had when we came, and at the inception we were far behind other states. Now I dare say we are as good as anybody else in the last 5 years, because I started it when I was in finance as finance minister, and now I'm in the IT ministry, which runs the platform. And I would say that we use this data more effectively and more automatically. That is, when people are eligible for a scheme, we notify them before they apply to us. Because we know, for example, a scholarship scheme based on a certain criteria. We know that they're eligible, and so we tell them and say, is this your bank account number? Can we send the money?
With Tamil Nadu's 32 of 38 districts actually having a higher per capita income, do you really think that there is a need for the kind of welfare politics that's really being conducted today in the state? It doesn't matter which party.
Look, again, I would say, if it is universal, then it is harder to justify. If it is targeted, then the whole job of the government is to identify. Now, we could get into a technical debate of what is the definition of targeting. Is 5% targeting? Is 80% targeting? Right? So I'm not going to get into that because that's a very complicated debate. But for the most part, our programs have been targeted and they have produced spectacular results. You take the scheme I announced when I was finance minister called Pudumai Pen, which is the scholarship scheme for government school girls.
Who study from class 6 to 12.
Yeah, or 10. 6 to 10 if you go to Polytechnic or ITI, 6 to 12 if you go to college. That has resulted in a much greater enrollment ratio for these girls to college. Not only that, after the scheme was announced, girls who had left high school 1 or 2 years earlier and not bothered to apply for college or couldn't afford to, have now applied because of the scheme and come back. Tens of thousands of them, not 1 or 2. So, though our overall gross enrollment ratio is very good, first in the country, near 50%, the ratio of government school educated girls was actually very low.
Right.
And this scheme has greatly increased that number almost to parity. In fact, overall now, more than 50% of the college-going students in the last 2-3 years are girls.
Right.
So the women's ratio has increased altogether.
Is it fair to deduce that because of such schemes, the factory employment ratio of women in Tamil Nadu has substantially increased to 41%?
I agree. I'd like to take... No. We have to be nuanced about everything. 42%, if I'm not mistaken, of all women working in formal manufacturing in the country are working in Tamil Nadu. It's not 42% of Tamil Nadu women. 42% of all women in the country employed in formal manufacturing sector are in Tamil Nadu, which is a remarkable, astounding statistic considering we're 5.8% of the population. That is actually says something bad about the country overall. That means we don't have enough manufacturing, we don't have enough women's jobs. But I am the first one to agree, and it's not just these programs, it is not just the last 2-3 years. I'm saying going back to 1920, the first government elected under Dayaki for Madras presidency of the Justice Party, going back to right for women to vote, compulsory elementary education, Dr. Muthulakshmi Reddy, my grandfather proposed as the Deputy Speaker of the House. From then till now, because we have fought very hard from the Special Marriage Act, where you don't need to worry about paying money for a priest and getting all these rituals done. In every way, we have tried to equal property rights far before Government of India. So, in trying to get the women's rights equal, you have greatly increased their participation in the formal economy, and it is a huge contributor to the fact that we have grown last year at 11.19%, because the sectors that led to that amazing statistic are electronics assembly, leather and non-leather footwear, and specialty textiles, all of which are massively women employ industries. So yes, you focus on the right things, and I mean it's like the old, the late great Lee Kuan Yew used to say that we can't engineer the economy. We engineer society well, and the economic consequences.
Women are 51% of the Tamil Nadu electorate, if I'm not wrong.
Yes.
So, what's the bearing a scheme like this would have, A, on the electorate, and secondly, the 2029 Women's Reservation Bill? Keeping that in mind, would you do anything differently in giving tickets out this time? Although I know it's a party.
I only speak at my constituency and what little inputs I had. We have already had 50% reservation in local bodies. Now, historically, 50% reservation for women meant that the person who otherwise would get it, the spouse or mother or sister of that person got it. So we have been fighting hard, particularly in my constituency. I've tried my best to find, actually because of the woman's qualifications rather than the spouse or the son or the fathers or the brothers. But that's at a lower level. I'll say something even more insightful than that. It is my experience on the field in politics that women are by far the more astute voters. They are far more capable of judging, and they are constantly collating information. Moving experiences of my entire political journey was in my first election back in 2016. It had been raining 2-3 days, including the day before polling. So on the date of polling, it was like all slush everywhere, and most of these polling booths are in schools.
But then what explains the rise in crime rate against women?
There is no rise in crime rate. Please read the statistics. There is a lot more reporting, but please get the statistics.
No, there is a lot more reporting, but that lot more reporting does not mean that there's less crime.
There's a lot more social reporting. No. Please look at the statistics. That's what I'm saying. There's a lot more social media and there's a lot more TV coverage of it. But please get me the statistics. If your statistics are right, I will stand corrected. I have seen the statistics for the last 5 years, and the actual crime rates have been going down.
The NCRB data says, Tamil Nadu figures among the only southern states actually to be among the top 5 with higher crime rates against both women and children.
Higher than what?
Higher than the rest of the country. So there are top 5 states. Tamil Nadu is the only southern state.
All I have is the statistics for the last 5 years.
Yes, so this is data up to 2023, 2024.
Yeah, because the accusation is that somehow this government has made it worse. I'm just saying that the last 5 years, the crime statistics have actually come down in this government, in this state. There have been more sensational cases, there has been more coverage of it in social media and other places. The crime rate has come down. It is worrisome to me and upsetting to me if what you say is that we're in the top 5 states on a per capita basis. We should correct that.
Yes.
But that is not in the making of this government. That's what I'm trying to say.
You're saying that you're not worse off. Given the fact that women are doing much better, the state is doing much better, would you agree that a certain amount of social justice, social equity has already been achieved in the state?
Yeah, I think, of course it has. Otherwise we would not be where we are today. The question is, when is good enough enough? And when should we keep striking? I think some things you can say it's good enough and we leave it at that. Some things you say we have to do better. Right? Like, in fact, this is, and because we are running out of time, I'll close with this. But back in 1968, after the DMK came to office for the first time, Perigirana, my grandfather all participated in the Golden Jubilee of the Justice Party, which was actually 2 years late. The Golden Jubilee was actually in 1966. But anyway, it was not celebrated in 66. So after Perigirana, who was an active member of the Justice Party, became Chief Minister in 68, he convened this, I think all of them together convened. So in that, my grandfather is given a speech. And he says, you know, when we started the movement, and when we looked at social equity, inclusion, education for all, etc., and we look forward now 50 years. In a way, we have achieved some of the goals in social acceptance. Anybody can go into the temple, Dalits can go all the way to the inner sanctum, you can marry whoever you want, you don't need a priest at the ceremony. All these things we have done
so
well.
casteism, social justice, social
all those
equity.
things, we have not done that it's perfect, but we have made strides, huge strides. He says, where we have not made strides, 68, he says, where we have not made strides. If you look at the average quality of life, if you look at the way of life, their access to food, clothing, shelter, water, jobs, we have not done nearly enough. The progress we have made on the social side, we have not made on the economic and development side. And in some sense, one precedes the other. Only after you get the social stuff worked, you can actually get that. But of course, it's not a 50-year, it's not a lag of 50 years. You should have done more. And then, of course, he points out that in the kind of 20 years before 68, both Japan and Germany were effectively reduced to rubble at the end of the Second World War. And he says, look at what they have done, that in 20 years they've gone from being rubble to becoming such economic powers that they are contributing and donating to us. For example, in setting up the IIT Madras with the West German collaboration and donation. So he says something they are doing is much, much better than what we are doing, right? So he says, we have done this well, but we should learn from them. And there's, probably something about work ethic, there's something about engineering, something about... We have to think about these things because we need to do much better in terms of economic activity and outcomes like per capita, consumption or quality of life. And so this is not a current problem.
So if we were to actually come back to this and say your flagship welfare schemes, 5-6 of them have done very well. They've been showing very good results. Where next? If you have to strike a balance between welfare and economics today, what would that be?
Well, I think it's also partly cyclical, right? In the sense that a virtual cycle is where you have, and there's no chicken or egg here, it's mutually reinforcing. But the two legs of the trade are you grow so fast, you create more jobs, you create more tax revenues, you create more room for the government to do activity. And then the government does better things in terms of reforming society, providing support, improving quality of life, better public goods and services, and better environment for entrepreneurship, innovation, businesses, and the cycle continues, right? So it's not just A or B. The question is how much of which and when. So surely when you're an underdeveloped or poor country, you focus a lot more on the welfare and a lot less room you have to do other things. When you're a middle income level like Tamil Nadu and southern India, you've got to start having a greater balance. So in our case, I would say, these cycles are not 5-year cycles. They're probably 10, 20, 30-year trajectories. In the 5 years that we've been there, we have seen outcomes on both sides. Meaning on the social front, we have done a lot of schemes. And for the first time in 10 years, as far as Tamil Nadu is concerned, and the only state in India as far as the rest of the country is concerned, we had 11.19% real growth last year, 16% nominal growth. Yeah. So we must be doing something right. Of course, we are also beneficiaries of global trends and all that, so I'm not saying 100% is our credit. But I'm saying that normally there's a lag, right? There's 2-3 year lag. If those who study CapEx, if we have experienced the growth last year, it's not because we did fantastically well last year. It's because 2-3 years ago we did all the right things, and that investment is coming to pay off. So there's usually a kind of that's the reason why fiscal responsibility acts cap the 3% fiscal deficit, because 3%. Even if you're doing all of that, zero revenue deficit, 3% fiscal deficit, all on capex. Even to do all of capex, if you do too much of it, then the interest payments exceed the ability to repay, because it takes time for your investments to yield returns. So in that sense, 11.19% last year is not indicative of last year, it's indicative of the years before where we did a lot of things right that has come to this outcome. And therefore, if we have continued to do things right, we should continue to see better growth for the next 2-3 years. Right?
I'll just keep the next few questions really short so that we cover some ground and wind up as quickly as possible. You were talking about your industrial policy, and I think for decades now, Tamil Nadu has been getting it right. Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, you've been competing, rank 1, rank 2 in terms of India's industrial output. But given the fact that the IT revolution, you get nearly 28-30% of your revenue, I think IT services contribute to all of it. In the face of AI and everything that's been happening in the West, how do you see the IT services and the BPO industry getting impacted?
There's actually 2-3 issues there. The first is, what is industrial policy? Industrial policy really must be only 2 major things, right? That is in the hands of one government. There are 2 other variables that are much broader variables that are not in the hand of any one government, but over time, which is what is the quality of your workforce, what is the quality of your infrastructure and connectivity. These things are all not fixable in 6 months or 1 year or 3 years. They are, like I said, 100 years.
Long gestation,
But the 2 things that you can do in real time is how much subsidies you give out to draw what, and how easy you make it to do business. Right? Those are only levers in your control, right? You make it easier to do business and you make subsidies. If you look at it that perspective, Tamil Nadu doesn't give out very much subsidies at all. Our annual subsidy bill, at least from my days as finance minister, is of the order of 3,000 or 4,000 crores a year. And that has been the case for a long time, and it is in a budget of 4 lakh crore, including debt repayment. So as we are not drawing these just because we are incentivizing people. The fundamental fact is we have a profoundly good workforce, we have a good ecosystem, we have momentum because we are already very good in automobiles, we are already very good in software, already very good in hardware. So we have all these things going for us. That drives the engine. It is not today's extra 1,000 crores or one extra trip, that does it. So industrial policy itself, you have to think in a much different way. As far as IT is concerned, I would say that the transformation of AI is not like a 1 day or 1 year or 1 week transformation. The cutting edge of science is moving very rapidly. It is moving more rapidly than it would have in normal circumstances, because we are living, in my view, in a bubble market where trillions of dollars of liquidity are looking for a home. And so hundreds of billions are being invested into the promise of AI with no visible return as of now. That is an abnormal situation. I don't know how long it will last. In fact, this war of attack on Iran might be the tipping point. And at some point, this is not going to be the case anymore. So I am more sanguine. I think the transformation of the industry through AI will be longer gestation than most people think. The amount of power that is needed, electricity, the amount of water that is needed, the amount of chips that are needed, the amount of input materials that are needed to really do it at scale, the amount of money that's needed to keep doing it like this. the amount of infinitely patient capital that can afford to put hundreds of billions of dollars without return. These are all abnormal conditions that will not last. So, in the meantime, for the sake of creating information for the engines to learn, there are a lot of new jobs being created. And eventually, when we are in a full-blown, ubiquitously available AI world, we'll be creating lots and lots of jobs. The problem will be there'll be much more sophisticated jobs than they are today. In ethics, in model validation, in oversight, in
data analytics.
In any number of fields. In AI itself, directly I'm saying, in validating the input data to make sure that it is not biased. So there's going to be all kinds of new jobs coming in this, and I've already seen some of them come in Tamil Nadu also. So what is shifting is that the large service organizations that used to be tens of thousands of recruits every year are going down to few thousand or flat.
That's right.
And what is happening on the flip side is that innovation is taking off like crazy. In Tamil Nadu, we had 2,300 or something registered startups in 2021. That number is now 13,800 or something. So
and even in that, you imagine it, am I right? You had received more than 400 applications?
Yeah, we got a lot. So I'm just saying we have a lot of people who are, and a lot of these are local problems. They're not looking to be the next Google. They're innovating around the problems they see in urban living, in waste management, in environmental improvement, in government functioning, in land management, these kinds, in agriculture. So I think the future is not that dire. I would say that you have to have a much more nuanced understanding. Like if you look in most places, and that is certainly true of Tamil Nadu. One of Tamil Nadu's greatest strengths is not that we have 60 big companies, is that we have tens of thousands of MSMEs. That's what distinguishes us from Gujarat. If you look at the most dramatic comparison, roughly equal economy per capita, roughly kind of equal in every other way, financially, equitably. In social outcomes, completely diverse. And within the nuances of industry, there are much more, mega factories in fertilizers, in chemicals, in ports, in everything.
There's a lot of diversity.
Yeah. No. In Gujarat, there's much more large-scale industry and doesn't trickle down to the people. Here is much more MSME.
Yeah, I'm talking about Tamil Nadu.
So here, the great luxury for us, and I did this research when I was in opposition, so I'll say it again here. Roughly 1.5 lakh rupees of capital creates a job in the MSME sector. In the global investor meets announced by the DMK regime, I haven't done the analysis for the DMK regime, it's not my department. But in the ADMK regime's announcements, I don't know how many fructified, but in the announcements, it costs roughly 30 lakhs to create one job at the global investor meet level. These are not the same scale at all, right? So all over the country, in fact even most of the world, the large employment comes out of MSMEs.
Yes.
The large companies are now more and more automated, more and more robotic, more and more machine driven. And so, Tamil Nadu's strength must equally be, it is not just industrial policy, it is not just attracting foreign investment, it is equally in the historical strength of the MSME sector.
So you have the highest number of STEM graduates in the country. Yeah. Also, you have the Nan Mudalvan scheme which talked about skill development. That's done phenomenally well. Are you creating a force that's really future ready to respond to the challenges that AI is throwing at the country and at, of course, Tamil Nadu?
Yeah, not just in AI, in everything. Because
in everything.
I think
you have dark factories today.
Yeah, the CM was very clear. I think the first, we put together advisory council of economic advisors back in 2021. And in the first meeting he had with them, he said, it is my ambition and my vision that Tamil Nadu should become the #1 source of human capital, skilled human capital, not just in India or Southeast Asia, but in the world. Right. So our plan is to, and that's just not like 3 guys. Mm-hmm. The weighted average workforce should be the best. And so that's all our efforts are towards that.
My other question to you would be, you talked about the Dravidian model and you've talked about the Aryan model. Given the fact that...
No, I only talked about the Dravidian model.
No, you talked about
anybody else.
No, so you talked about the Dravidian model and you talked about welfare, you talked about social justice. But given the fact that, well, you're talking about the Hindi, model, so to say. Aryan was my interpretation of it.
Yeah, I haven't even said anything about the Hindi model. I only talk about my model. Yeah.
Yes. So with the NDA and its allies, all of them coming up with many welfare models, they were initially talking about development, but they've also gotten closer, so close to welfare to compete with you. Where does the real distinction lie between the two models?
Listen, I don't have a lot of patience or time to waste on kind of random rhetoric, right? The problem has always been that politics is about kind of sloganeering and speechifying. And so this same NDA government, this same Prime Minister a few years ago was on a tirade against the so-called Revdi culture. And the same Prime Minister back in 2014 sold us on the Gujarat model as a development model. Now it turns out two things are true. One is that the NDA governments all over the states are handing out money even without a basis. See, if I give some money to highly educated women, it's a different outcome. If you give money to women who have never been to school, then the outcome is going to be very different for them.
Yes.
And a lot more money than we give in a poorer state. Right? But the more profound point is that what is the notion of development? Like what is the ambition here? If you take Gujarat and Tamil Nadu, the per capita income of Gujarat has grown much, much faster than Tamil Nadu in the last 10 years. I'm saying ADMK and DMK combined. Right? And it's been BJP all along, for 15 years. Some of that you could argue is the Prime Minister government directing funds and resources to Gujarat, but leave that aside for a second. Forget how we got here. Answer is, where are we?
Yeah.
And though we have roughly the same per capita income, we are profoundly different societies. Profoundly different societies in the sense the multidimensional poverty index of the government of India is something like 12+% in Gujarat and less than 2% in Tamil Nadu. Number of doctors per thousand is something like 4 times worse in Gujarat. The ratio of girls and all students finishing high school is over 85-90% Tamil Nadu. It's less than 50% in Gujarat. So we have much different societies. Same per capita income, just for hypothesis. Which society do you want? Now, if you're the Gujarat model, you'll say something different. You'll say, yes, but my fiscal metrics are much better than Tamil Nadu's. I don't have revenue deficits, I don't have the same level of debt to GDP, so I'm doing better. Then I say, okay, if the cost of having a better societal outcome, not just a little better, but a dramatically better societal outcome is that I have to have more leverage in the system, then I'll take it. Ideally, I'd like to have both. I'd like to have less leverage and better outcomes. But if I have to choose one or the other, forget that I'm a minister, forget that I'm a politician, forget that I was finance minister, let's say I'm just a citizen living in state X or state Y. I would much rather live in a state where I have the societal outcomes of Tamil Nadu, despite the government carrying the debt. Because at some point, some talented person with some political will to back will be able to fix the debt problem, probably in 3 to 5 years. It is not a problem that will take 50 years to fix. But if you have not got the people into the right education system with the right health and with the right mindset socially, without proper communal harmony, that will take at least a generation or 2 to fix. So if I have to have one of the two problems, I'd rather have a problem that eventually can be taken care of with the right people and the right political kind of, vision and skill and will.
So my last question to you before we wind up for this evening would be, how would you rate your government's performance in the last 5 years as both Finance Minister and as IT and Data Services Minister, and why should you be given a chance to come back?
Look, we are all shaped or limited by our experiences and by what we have read and by the data we've analyzed. So I've said it before, I'll say it again. I have looked at the data from 2003 till now because I see the world before 2003 as a different world because 2003 there were two profound changes. One was the Fiscal Responsibility Act of Tamil Nadu, which preceded, ours preceded the FRBM Act of Delhi, visionary leadership here. And the second was the shift towards a defined contribution pension scheme, which is the only way you can stay in compliance with the FRA. If you were defined benefit, you would not be able to. So there's a pre-2003 and there's a post-2003. So if you look at post-2003 till now, I will say that 2003 to 2014, irrespective of whether the government was DMK, Tamil Nadu was on a good path because we had significant improvement in the fisc.
Yeah.
And we had good schemes and we had phenomenal growth, particularly in the period of 2006 to 11 when Kalangir was Chief Minister in our DMK government. We had a CAGR of 10%. 5 years CAGR, 10%, real. After that, from 2011 to 2014, as long as Ms. Jayalalitha was there, it was okay. But from 2014 to 2021 was a really bad period for Tamil Nadu. The debt to GDP went from around 15.8, 16% up all the way to 26 before COVID and 28 COVID. And the interest to revenue, which had gone down from 22 to 11, went all the way back to 18, 19, 20.
Yeah.
Should be pre-COVID, and then the lockdown year went even above that. Relative to that starting point, I would say that the last 5 years have been spectacularly good because at least the first 2 years that I was in the old seat, which had multiple portfolios, I have proudly said on the floor of the House multiple times that though I give 100% to the credit to the Chief Minister because it was his political will, he picked me, he gave me the freedom and he protects me when I take courageous decisions. But the fact is, I've said I did more change in those 2 years than in any 20 years. Because I did so much change, we got so many better outcomes.
Right.
So you can see that as a period of consolidation. We did new schemes, we did the free bus ride, we did free breakfast, we did a lot of other things. But despite that, we saw huge improvement in the fisc because of profound change. After that, the last 3 years have not been about that much improvement, but about many, many more schemes. So if you take the 5 years as a whole, our overall fiscal situation is slightly better and definitely no worse than we were when we came into office. And the social situation is much, much better. We have much better enrollment into colleges. We have much better, liquidity in the hands of women. We have much better labor market participation because of free bus ride. We have much better savings from that to go into children's nutrition. We have so many social outcomes, much better attendance in elementary schools because of free breakfast. Yeah. As a consequence of all of that, we have again reached 11.19% growth in 25, which is the effect of investments and work done before, because it doesn't turn like that. I can't invest today and get outcome today. I invest today, I'll get an outcome 2 years from now. So we are on a path. Our base is built enough that we can see this kind of sustained growth or per capita, year-over-year GDP growth as a possibility. In that sense, I would say we have done more with better data, with better targeting, with better professionalism and with better kind of focus change in these 5 years than at any point between 2003 and now.
So the next 5 years will be about consolidation?
That's all the, no. So that's all the data that I have looked at. I don't know what it looked like in the 60s, 70s and all. So the next 5 years will be about increasing the same kind of focus that we have had, about nuanced, thoughtful schemes, about focusing on continued growth, continued taking advantage of the opportunities, right? We are in a tremendously volatile world economy.
Yeah. Geopolitical scenarios are changing by the hour.
Completely. So we want to be able to benefit from that. The core of it is to have the right people in the right, with the right skill set and the right nutrition and the right kind of mindset. That has always been our focus. We'll continue to do that. But as the world evolves, we evolve.
All right. Thank you so much for speaking to us. It was a pleasure to hear from you and good luck for the upcoming election.
Thank you.